There's a particular kind of silence that settles over a building when something fundamental has shifted. It isn't peaceful, it's tight, watchful, like the walls themselves are waiting to see what comes next. That Friday morning, Luxbridge Partners was wrapped in it. Phones still rang, keyboard still clicked, but everything underneath had gone still like breath held too long. I'd been here for 17 years. I knew the difference between silence that meant focus and silence that meant fear. This was the latter. Doors that were usually propped open had been left half shut. Conversations had lowered their volume or stopped entirely when footsteps approached. Even the elevators seemed slower. Word had circulated quietly unofficially that Randall Breyer, our CEO, had taken emergency medical leave. No farewell email, no all-staff announcement, just his absence, and in its place the sudden rise of his son Camden Breyer. I'd seen him twice before in person. Once at the holiday gala where he'd introduced himself as in fintech, adjacent things, and once in the elevator where he mistook me for someone from the translation vendor. He was the kind of man who always looked like he'd just come from a TED Talk, slim fit blazer, no tie, curated stubble eyes that saw everything and absorbed very little. Now as interim CEO, he strode down the hallway with the confidence of someone used to being agreed with. He passed me without pause, without nod, without even a flicker of recognition. Not rude, just indifferent, as if I were a coffee machine or a hallway plant. That didn't bother me, not anymore. I'd made peace long ago with the fact that the work I did decoding cultural context, softening billion-dollar misunderstandings, holding relationships steady between people who barely shared a language was invisible to most people in this building. It was also the only reason some of our largest accounts were still intact. From my corner office, mostly glass and tucked between legal and international operations, I watched him disappear into Randall's old space, already gesturing like it belonged to him. I didn't flinch, but I did start taking notes. And I listened. The meeting request came through a calendar ping marked only as Departmental Realignment Review, 4:30 p.m. No agenda, no context. Just the subtle hum of inevitability wrapped in polite vagueness. I accepted without comment. The conference room was already half lit when I arrived 10 minutes early as always. Camden was there, seated at the far end of the table, legs casually crossed, leafing through a slim folder. His blazer was a touch too tight across the shoulders, like he'd grown into power faster than his tailor could adjust. He didn't look up when I entered. "Selina Wright," he said flatly, eyes still on the papers. I took a seat, unbothered by the familiarity in his tone. He was already talking before I'd even adjusted the chair. We're simplifying things around here, centralizing, streamlining. Our international language support is highly specialized and expensive. He paused like he expected me to argue. I didn't. We've decided to outsource that function to a firm in Singapore. Scalable, cost-efficient, global reach. He used the word rationalizing 3 times before finishing his sentence, as if repetition would disguise the carelessness in the decision. No mention of performance. No inquiry about transition coverage. No curiosity about what I actually did. I nodded once, slow and silent. Then I reached down, unplugged my laptop from its case, slid it across the polished table toward him and stood. Well, I said, calm and even, "Good luck with your Monday meeting." That made him look up. What meeting? I smiled, not bitterly, not smugly, just enough to let the silence carry weight. "You'll find out." He blinked as I turned and walked out. No dramatics, no parting speech. But as I stepped into the hallway, the glass caught his reflection behind me, confused, still holding the folder, completely unaware of what he'd just let walk out the door. I made it back to my office before the first notification from HR hit my inbox. Severance details. Termination effective Sunday, standard procedure. I closed the laptop on my desk, not the one I'd left behind, and reopened a different folder entirely, the one marked for emergencies. The laptop I kept at home held more than documents. It held memories lines of negotiation in 7 languages folders, titled by city and client, and notes from conversations most of my co-workers never even knew happened. I opened one marked Abu Dhabi, port dispute. I could still remember the pressure of that morning when a shipment worth millions had been detained due to conflicting customs codes. I spoke to the official in Arabic, not just translated words, but spoke as he did formally, precisely acknowledging hierarchy the way protocol demanded. By the time the CEO finished his 3rd espresso in Chicago, the containers were already being released. Another folder. Senegal. Air freight hold. A customs emergency nearly cost us a medical tech partnership. The entire shipment risked being seized for lack of a notarized waiver. I called the local liaison, switched to French, and within 40 minutes walked a junior border agent through the clause line by line. I never mentioned it to Camden. He wouldn't have cared. But the one that always returned to me was Tokyo. Misstep correction. One of our junior partners had referred to the Japanese CFO by first name in an email. Twice. It was unintentional, but devastating. I drafted a handwritten apology on premium stationery using the correct honorifics. I wrapped it in fine paper and included a small gift, a lacquered pen with his family crest I'd quietly researched. The next week, the $12 million contract was signed. I never got credit for it. I never needed it. Clients didn't trust me. Because of my title, they trusted me because I knew when to speak and, more importantly, when not to. They trusted me because I studied their customs, respected the pauses, the rituals, the tones that couldn't be taught in a PowerPoint deck or replaced by an app. Inside Luxbridge, I was language support. Outside, I was the reason the bridges held. But no one ever asked. Not Camden, not the board, not even Randall in recent years. I was fluent in more than languages. I was fluent in being forgotten. And I knew the cost of that fluency was about to show itself. I didn't spend the weekend angry. I didn't call friends or post cryptic things online or drink anything stronger than green tea. What I did was clean. My drawers, my hard drives, my memory. By Saturday afternoon, I had 3 labeled folders on my desk. One held years of cultural briefs I'd customized for clients, including nuance notes most wouldn't have known how to interpret, let alone draft. The second was a performance archive projects delivered early negotiations I'd turned from hostile to cooperative back-channel feedback from high-level partners. The third was thinner, a list of what the company had already started to lose. It wasn't revenge, it was documentation, my kind of language. By Sunday, I had accepted what had happened, not with bitterness, but with clarity. What they saw as a cost I had always known was a structure, and they'd just pulled out a support beam they didn't know was there. At 9:17 p.m., my phone buzzed. A message from Kira, one of the newer associates fresh from Columbia, smart, twitchy, overly caffeinated. Celine, hi. I know you're technically no longer, but Gold March Group is in the building. They're asking for you. They won't start until you arrive. What should I tell them? I looked at the screen for a long moment, then typed back slowly. I'm not available. She read it, then nothing. No follow-up. No protest. I knew what she was doing, forwarding it, escalating it, passing the hot coal up the ladder. I closed the phone, took a final look at the documents on my desk, and slipped the thinnest folder, the one marked Client Attrition Risk, into a padded envelope. They would call again. Probably in the morning. Probably more than once. But I'd already handed Camden all the information he needed when I slid him my laptop and walked away. It just hadn't come in the form he recognized. The rest I would let unfold on its own. Gravity doesn't need help falling. By 9 a.m., the sun had started to warm the window panes in my apartment, and the kettle had just begun to hiss. I was wrapping up a quick scan of the Singapore vendor's public portfolio, clean formatting, flashy credentials, but nothing remotely built on nuance when my phone started to buzz. Unknown number. I let it ring. Then another. Different number. then a third. By the fourth call, curiosity won out. "Celine Mortara," I answered, a frantic breath on the other end. "It's Miles Camden's assistant." He didn't wait for acknowledgement. The Gold March VP just walked out. They said you were the only reason they trusted us. That without you, the relationship was no longer culturally viable. I'm quoting. Camden didn't even know what that meant. "Celine, would you be willing to come in?" Just for today, I stood at the counter watching steam rise from my cup. "No." A pause. "But this is serious." "It always was," I said calmly. "You replaced understanding with automation. That never ends well." He didn't know. That's not my problem anymore. I ended the call. No anger, just finality. By noon, word was everywhere. A former colleague texted, "Did you hear Camden flipped out in the boardroom? CFO looked like he'd seen a ghost." Another messaged, "They're scrambling. Gold March isn't the only one asking questions." I sipped my tea slowly. The building I had quietly held together was cracking, not because I wished it harm, but because they had removed the one person who spoke the right language, and not just the verbal kind. At 12:43 p.m., an email arrived. No subject line, no signature. Just 3 words in the body, "The CEO's back." I read it twice, then leaned back in my chair, the light shifting on the envelope beside me. Some returns don't need announcement. Some storms arrive in silence. By Tuesday morning, the stories began to drift into my inbox first as whispers, then as confirmations. The Japanese partner, Mr. Kenji, had not replied to a single message from the team since Friday. Someone forwarded me the last thread. Camden had addressed him by his first name, twice, in the subject line. No honorific, no hierarchy acknowledged. I didn't have to ask what the silence meant. I knew. Later that day, I got a message from Raul, an old colleague now working independently in Sao Paulo. "Your company's rep just called our mutual client in Brazil Mano in an email. Thought they were being friendly." The client was livid. Said it was deeply unprofessional. I simply added it to the file. Then came the ping from an Indian tech firm we'd been courting for 6 months. The liaison's email to Camden was blunt. "We are pausing all investment conversations until cultural alignment is clarified," which translated from diplomacy meant we don't trust you anymore. Each entry in my growing dossier was meticulously logged. Dates, names, copied correspondence, not as evidence for a case, but as proof of erosion, of what happens when you remove the quiet anchor and replace her with noise. No one had asked me to track these things. I wasn't being paid, but I did it anyway. Not for them, for the record. Because memory, like language, becomes fragile when no one bothers to preserve it. Camden, I heard, was holding meetings back-to-back, talking about realignment and next steps. He posted a photo on LinkedIn shaking hands with a vendor rep under the caption, "Modern leadership is global by default." I added it to the appendix titled, "Optics versus Reality." They weren't just losing clients, they were losing credibility. And the more they scrambled to fix it, the more obvious it became that no one in the building actually knew what had been keeping the structure intact. I didn't rush to interfere. I waited. I watched, and I kept the envelope by the door. The email came early Wednesday morning, just after sunrise. 2 sentences, no subject line, no signature. "Celine, I deeply regret what happened. I would appreciate the chance to speak with you." I didn't reply right away. I let the quiet stretch while I finished my tea, then packed the padded envelope into my bag and headed out. Luxbridge looked exactly as it always had, marble floors, the faint scent of coffee and toner voices rising and falling behind glass walls. But there was a stiffness, now, a hesitation. Eyes followed me longer than they used to. Not recognition, not quite respect. Something in between, like watching a returned ghost they weren't sure how to greet. Randall was waiting when I arrived. No receptionist, no assistant, no desk between us. He looked older than I remembered, thinner around the jaw, but still centered in that quiet way few people master. He didn't waste time. "I won't ask you to return under Camden," he said, "but I would like to bring you back independently, as a consultant, full access, your own scope, no interference." He reached into a slim folder and slid a document across the table. I didn't pick it up. I just read the last line aloud. "This agreement cannot be revoked or amended by any member of the Breyer family." He nodded once. "You'd report only to me. 6-month contract. Triple your previous salary. Discretionary autonomy." I sat back, letting the weight of it settle between us. "I'm not saying yes," I told him. "I wouldn't expect you to," he replied. "But I want you to know I see now what you built, what we risked by letting it walk out the door." I studied him for a moment. There was no performance in his voice. Just a man trying to repair the thing he'd let someone else damage. I offered a small, complete smile. "I'll think about it." And then I stood, took the envelope from my bag and slid it gently onto the center of the table. I walked through the glass doors of Luxbridge without fanfare. No announcement. No welcome back email. Just a visitor badge that turned green instead of red, and a quiet nod from the front desk. My new office was a temporary 1-3 walls of frosted glass tucked between legal and procurement. I didn't mind. I wasn't here to decorate. By the third day, the numbers had begun to form a pattern, not just isolated mistakes, but fractures. 3 major mistranslations in final contracts, each with potential legal exposure. 2 cultural missteps that bordered on offensive, one involving an inappropriate gift to a Japanese client, another a missed ritual greeting during a South Asian partnership call. And worst of all, a vendor-drafted clause that mistakenly suggested our clients would be financially liable for our own delays. I didn't waste time assigning blame. I just recorded verified and highlighted. The deeper I looked, the more obvious it became that Camden had built his outreach strategy on Google Translate and confidence. No one had reviewed the vendor's deliverables. No one had even asked what certain phrases meant. What I saw wasn't just failure, it was rot. A slow collapse dressed up in hashtags and LinkedIn posts. I didn't go to Camden. I didn't send an internal memo. I requested a meeting with Randall directly. His assistant responded within the hour. The next morning, I stepped into his office again, same as before, same quiet gravity. This time I came with a file folder. I laid it gently in front of him and opened it without a word. "This," I said, "is what your outreach efforts have accomplished in 90 days. He leaned forward, scanning the highlighted portions, the client annotations, the missed deadlines. He didn't speak. I flipped to the final page. "And this," I added, "is what it will cost you if it continues." He sat back, eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but understanding. Not everyone needs a warning bell to recognize a reckoning. He closed the folder slowly. I was already standing. The room was colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just the stillness. Half the board was already seated when I entered 3 directors I'd seen before: the CFO, Marcia from Global Partnerships, and Camden, stiff in a chair too large for his posture. Randall sat at the head of the table. He didn't greet me. He didn't need to. I placed 3 documents in front of each member, printed and bound. No slides, no handouts, just paper clean and direct. The first, I said evenly, is a 90-day audit of missteps and resulting revenue loss, verified by internal metrics and client correspondence. No one moved. The second is a set of direct statements from 3 international clients. Each one cites the termination of cultural trust and requests continued partnership under one condition: that I remain and Mr. Camden Breyer step aside. A few heads lifted. One board member adjusted her glasses. The third is a cultural protocol breakdown. It outlines a series of offenses, small to some, irreversible to those who matter. None of these incidents occurred under my supervision. All happened after. Camden cleared his throat. These clients are resistant to modernization. We're streamlining, not failing. Randall raised a hand. "Enough," he said. "We've heard the silence." Camden's mouth shut. The board didn't argue. Randall looked down the table. "Effective immediately, I'm resuming full CEO control. Camden is on indefinite leave from operational duties. The interim leadership board will be dissolved pending review." He turned to me without pause. "Celine, will you lead the rebuild?" I met his gaze. "I'll need a new office." There was no applause, just quiet acceptance as Randall nodded and turned back to the board. The room settled like dust, finding its shape. I gathered my copies, slid them into a leather folder, and stood. As I passed Camden, he stared down at the table like it might give him a different ending if he didn't look away. I didn't slow, but just before reaching the door, I paused and said quietly without turning, "You fired me because you didn't understand what I did." The corner office was smaller than I expected, but the light was right. Sun filtered in through tall windows, brushing the walls in soft gold. A ceramic cup of jasmine tea rested by my keyboard steam, curling upward in quiet spirals. I had arrived early. I always did. My desk was clear except for one open tab. A message draft to Mr. Kenji, subject renewal with respect. I wrote slowly, carefully. Not just words, but intent. I addressed him with the proper honorific, referenced our last successful engagement, acknowledged the disruption, and extended not an apology, but a restoration. I didn't ask him to return. I invited him to consider whether what had once been built might still hold. Then I signed my name in full and pressed send. Outside my office, the floor was beginning to stir. Voices, footsteps, a printer coming to life. I leaned back and watched the morning assemble itself quiet as breath. This had never been about revenge. I didn't need Camden to suffer or to be humiliated. What I needed, what I insisted on, was recognition of a truth too many systems forget. You can't outsource relationships, you can't automate trust, and you cannot fire what you do not understand. The damage Camden caused hadn't come from malice. It came from ignorance masquerading as innovation, and that was far more dangerous. When I passed him in the hallway that final time, he stood still, gaze down, shoulders heavy. He didn't speak, but I did. "You fired me because you didn't understand what I did. You brought me back to fix it, but I returned so you'd learn the difference between having power and deserving it." Then I kept walking. In the quiet that followed, I opened a fresh document titled "It Restoration Notes" and began outlining next steps. One by one, I would reach out not to regain control, but to rebuild trust. Not loudly, not quickly, but precisely. And that would be more than enough.